Well, thanks everybody for coming out again on this nice, warm August evening.
We got rain, that was so wonderful.
We did get some rain today, so that was nice. The clouds have been looking very ominous, but it hasn't really turned into a whole lot. So in Lesson 11, we're talking about the church, and in Volume 4, the author goes into a little bit of a description of true religion before the coming of Jesus. And of course, that story is found in the book of Genesis. And if you haven't read the first few chapters of Genesis, we're going to do a quick little review today. In chapter 1 of Genesis, it is the story of creation as it happens over the course of 6 days, and God rests on the seventh. It's a very plain telling of the creation story. It is there to simply show that the great lights in the sky are not gods themselves. They're created by God, and that God created the world to be good, and that he looked upon it with joy, and he then rested on the seventh day. The number of moral teachings in there is they are there, but they're different from the character of the story about Adam and Eve. In Adam and Eve, we see that God creates all the heavens and earth very simply. It's just taken care of in just a few verses. But then he plants this garden in Eden and placed the man there whom he had formed. So man now shows up earlier on in the story, and the man then is kind of in charge of this whole creation. God puts him there, and God is able to converse with Adam. They're very close. We don't see that there's this separation between God and Adam that we see later on in the scripture. But the man needs a companion, and so the Lord puts him to sleep and fashions a woman out of his rib. And the man says, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one has been taken." So this goes to a very fundamental understanding of the church and the human person, that there is gender, right? So there is male and female, and the natural order is that they work together in a partnership. And this partnership between man and woman is then codified later in marriage. And this is a proper place for children to be born. And because Adam and Eve are fashioned together out of the same flesh, it is natural and good that this is how it continues. Now, the problem is that the sin enters into their situation through this serpent who tempts the woman, and she eats of the fruit and then gives it to the man. We talked about this, the fall of Adam previously, but we see now the understanding of religion begins to fundamentally change, because Adam is no longer able to listen to God in the same way. We see that God now departs and goes out of the Garden of Eden and off into heaven. And little by little, the ages of man get less and less and less, that they begin to live shorter and shorter lives. Now, very quickly after the fall of Adam and Eve, we see the first murder, and that is the story of Cain and Abel. If you want to understand human nature, you need to know these two stories, the fall of Adam and Eve and the murder of Abel. So the man had intercourse with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain, saying, "I have produced a male child with the help of the Lord." Next she gave birth to his brother Abel. Abel became a herder of flocks, and Cain a tiller of the ground. This is in chapter 4 of Genesis. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the ground, while Abel, for his part, brought the fatty portion of the firstlings of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and dejected. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why are you dejected? If you act rightly, you will be accepted. But if not, sin lies in wait at the door. Its urge is for you, yet you can rule over it." Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out in the field." When they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. This explains a lot of human nature, okay? So Cain is jealous. He's the older son. He should be more prosperous or more accepted because he's the firstborn, but he's not. For whatever reason, God does not look with favor upon his offering. Now, what Cain should have done, as God tells him, is go back and offer a better sacrifice. Do something a little bit more. Work a little harder. Show that you are as devoted as your brother Abel, and everything will be fine. But Cain expresses jealousy, showing that not only does he want what Abel has, he also doesn't want Abel to have it. So he will take it to the point where Abel doesn't, and it is murder. That is how this is expressed. And in much of human existence, we see this happening, where when someone who is rich and powerful sees that someone else is being successful, oftentimes the human instinct is to go and crush it, take it away. Don't let them have it. Why should they be successful? And this is often how public policies work. That if we see one group that's rising a little too high, we'll try and do things to bring them back down, whether that's through taxation or other policies. Government is often responsible for doing this. Or even in families, if we see that one sibling gets jealous of the other, they'll do things to undercut the other person and try to make sure that they don't get what the other person doesn't have, and on, all through all the course of human history. But God doesn't want it to be this way, and so this whole situation continues up until the time of Noah, where God finally has to wash away all this sin and wickedness over the earth and start again. But then it starts all over again. So not until he sends his son is he able to restore the original state of man, where Adam and Eve could talk and walk and understand with and understand God. Now God does that himself through his son. So his son comes to the earth to restore true religion. And true religion means you can talk to God and God can talk to you, if we want to really, really, really simplify it. And then once you know God's will, you do it. So in our day, this of course is the church. At the time promised, God sent his Son, our Lord, to redeem the world and save all men. He came to save all men, and yet he remained upon earth only 33 years. We can easily understand that by his death he could save all those who lived before he did, but how are they to be saved who should live after him down to the end of the world? How is his grace to be given to them? How are they to know of him or of what he taught? All this was to be accomplished by his church. So prior to the advent of religion, what we would commonly understand to be religion, people worshipped all sorts of things. They would worship the storm clouds. They might worship the sun or the moon, the mountain. They had all sorts of ideas about worshiping their ancestors. We find a lot of, in these ancient cultures, a lot of little statues. Sometimes that statue could be of a relative, or it could be a fertility god. A lot of times when you see these old statues, they have the bodily proportions are all out of whack, so that they look more fertile or more virile or stronger or whatever is trying to be proposed by this idol. You can look at it and say, gee, I wonder what that is supposed to signify. They're often very, very clear what they're trying to signify. And in these ancient religions, it was often very much about getting something for yourself, that you were going to get more fertile fields, you'd have more kids, you'd have more wives. Oftentimes these religions were for the men, right? And you would get more success in your business or victory in war. All those sorts of things were where the gods were at. And it was often about succeeding, because without having modern scientific theory, you didn't really know why the world worked the way it did. Why did it rain or not rain? Why did the crops grow or not grow? And what was it about that would, if you could pray to a God that would give you something, that was a very kind of a transactional arrangement that most, frankly, guys could get behind. It makes sense. Okay, so if I put in my offering here, I'm going to get a return when it comes time to harvest the flocks. Clearly that was a good thing for them. Now, interestingly, I just saw a preview of the Diocesan Rediscovering Sunday survey. Did any of you take that?
Yeah.
So the Rediscovering Sunday survey was asking, why do you go to Mass? Why do you like your parish? What is it about your parish that you enjoy? And all that. And I saw in there a couple things. I don't know that the data was broken out quite as much as I would want it to, because what most people were saying in the survey was that they liked their parish because they felt welcomed, they felt like it was warm and inviting, and that it was a place where the pastor really liked them. And I'm thinking, that's kind of interesting, because as a guy, I've never really thought about any of those things. As an attender of parishes. I've attended parishes before. So I kind of broke down the who filled out the survey. And can you guess who the vast majority of people were that filled out the survey?
Women in their
Women.
50s and 60s.
65 plus.
Wow.
So female retirees. And so when I talk to various people, I hope this doesn't get me canceled, I'll say, but when I talk to guys, a lot of guys will say when they go to church, they want there to be something to do. They want to know, like, what committee can I join? What project can I be a part of? And does the priest, does he give a clean, logical homily? I can take something and then go home with it. Did I learn something? It's very, very practical speaking. If I talk to younger people or the ladies, they will say more of what the survey presented, that there's got to be a personal connection. There's got to be something there that I feel like people want me there, those sorts of things. It's a common breakdown that I've seen over my years in ministry. So I wonder if there'd be a way to get a better representation of that survey, because I think we do need to have it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be welcoming places, but I think if that becomes our only focus, we're going to be leaving a lot of people behind.
Well, one of the things I didn't like about it is they had one side if you liked it, and one side that if you didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
You should have actually taken both. You should have taken both views and answered both questions.
Right. And look,
if you answered one, if you was over 10, if you were out of 10 and answered those questions, it was totally different if you answered it at a 2 or a 7.
Right.
Because you didn't get a complete
It's
analysis.
It's hard to get good data, but we know that, what we do know is that most Catholics leave the church after they graduate from high school. It's the vast majority of Catholics just leave after they get confirmed, and the vast majority do not come back. So there is something that we are not providing for those people. And the thing is that and from the survey, most people said their parish is a welcoming environment. They like being there. They're nice people. The pastor likes me. The vast majority says it's a welcoming place. If that's true, then why? And that's why they stay. Why aren't more people staying in church? You got a contradiction in the evidence there. There's this huge hole in the middle of evidence that we don't have. So let's keep digging in here to the notion of the church. We'll see if we can suss this out a little bit. So we can easily understand that by his death he could save all those who lived before he did. But how are they to be saved who should live after him, down to the end of the world? How is his grace to be given to them? How are they to know of him or of what he taught? All this was to be accomplished by his church. So the religion that Christ came to show us was that it wasn't just about the practical aspects of becoming more wealthy or more powerful or more well-liked. It was about the salvation, about getting to heaven. So this was the emphasis for the church for her first 2,000 years. That if you want to get to heaven when you die, you've got to live your life a certain way. And then question 114 is, well, which are the means instituted by our Lord to enable men at all times to share in the fruits of the redemption? That's a loaded question, but if the fruits of the redemption are salvation, then the question is, how do we attain salvation? The means instituted by our Lord to enable men at all times to share in the fruits of the redemption are the church and the sacraments. So the church believes that all people who are saved by the church. And the church is Christ. So Christ came to found the church, and if you're a part of the church, that's the only way we know for sure that you can be saved. And the church has 4 marks. Because there are a lot of churches that look like those old ancient religions that were superseded by Christianity. So even there's some Christian religions that are more founded on a gospel of posterity, or is that the right word?
Prosperity.
Prosperity, yeah. The gospel of prosperity.
Like Joel Osteen and those guys.
Kind of the Joel Osteen crowd, or some of those. And we saw it can be easy to get in this idea. I really like there's an old Steve Martin movie. Was it The Miracle Man or The Miracle Worker? He did these traveling shows, and he played a traveling preacher.
Yeah.
It's an excellent movie. But one of the things he does is that he has his crew go around and plant $20 bills in people's pockets, and they'll say, "Well, I put $20 donation in last week, and it came right back." And they'll pull their wallet up and they'll show the money that they got, kind of showing that there's this prosperity that can be had if you just give to the church. A lot of the televangelists back in the day were doing this. They're making tons and tons of money. And when I was a kid, that's when kind of a lot of these big mega churches were breaking down, and we had so much fun making fun of the televangelists on the school playground. It was just something that we did. But the church has always said that it's not about giving to the church, but it's living within your means, supporting good causes, helping the poor, and I think that most Catholic parishes are not fabulously wealthy. There are a few that I'm aware of that have big healthy bank accounts, but most of the churches I've been at they do okay for themselves. They have a little bit of a savings for a rainy day, but the money that they have, they spend on maintaining their building and doing good works in the community without an idea of amassing tons and tons of wealth. That's not the point. And the pastors don't get paid as much as a banker or as much as a lawyer. We have a salary, we have a house, but we're supposed to try to live modestly. And if we're going to understand what a true church is, the true church is going to have the 4 marks. 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. So 1 means that there is only one way, that if God so imagine you're God up in heaven, okay? And we look down at the earth and we say, you know what? I want these people to be saved. I don't want them to forget me. I need to reveal to them the true path to heaven. So if God is a reasonable figure, he is going to come down and tell people. But he's only going to tell them in one way, right? He's going to say, this is the one way, the best way to get to heaven. So as Catholics, we believe this, that he sent his son, who gave a pretty pointed message to the people. This is the way to get to heaven. Now, there had been other ways before that. There was the law, the prophets, and those sorts of things. But the way that Christ gives is superior to all of those. And so the church holds on to this singularity of vision and say, well, we have the one revelation that came from God, and everyone else, these other people, they were just men. And so if it was any revelation of Hinduism or Islam or Confucianism or Buddhism, anything else, we would say those were just men, and they did not have the full revelation of the Godhead. So we hold on to that very strictly and say that there's one revelation. Now, do we then go and say, well, they are all automatically completely wrong? Well, no. I mean, that there are elements of, I think the Second Vatican Council said that there are elements of truth in those other religions, and a study of those can hopefully lead you to the truth, but ultimately it is the Christian way that is the one revealed by God. That it will be holy. So this holiness factor means that it resembles God, right? What did the angels say? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. So if something is holy, it is like God. So the church needs to reflect God in its dealings. That it should be beautiful, it should be authoritative, it should be just, it should be fair, and all those things. So that's why when there's a scandal in the church, people, they don't just get mad at the bishops, they get mad at God. Because for them, the church is the living representation of God for them. And this is why it's so important for the leaders of the church to also be holy. And scandals don't just hurt the financial aspect of the church, but it affects people's faith and their salvation. So the church needs to be holy. That it's Catholic. Catholic means universal. That it is for the whole world. And if you go to Africa, China, Japan, America, Europe, South America, anywhere you go, you'll find the church there. And it is able to be a part of all cultures and all expressions of people's faiths. And it is something that will take anybody in. As long as you're willing to believe what the church teaches, you can be part of this. That's what it means to be Catholic. And finally, it is apostolic. So the apostles were given the faith by Christ. They handed it on to their successors, and we bear that today. So some churches may have one or two of these, but never all the marks. So a church could be holy and Catholic, which means that it is widespread and gives a good example. But if it doesn't have apostolic teaching, it's not true. At some point, someone else made up some things. So we might look at the example of Martin Luther. I think maybe we used this last time, where Luther said that he found the book of Revelation to be very offensive. That's why he took it out of his Bible. Okay? So he had this idea that he didn't like the book of the Bible, so he could take it out, and that was sufficient. He didn't like the church's teaching on celibacy, so he gave that up too. And he decided that I don't need to practice celibacy, so he married a nun. And so these are the sorts of things that a developer of a new religion will do. They'll take aspects of the Catholic religion, modify it to suit their taste a little bit better, and then that becomes a new church or a new community. So as Catholics, we believe that the Roman Catholic Church is the only one that can show all four of these marks, therefore the only true church. And can other people be saved? We've already talked about that. Yes, but the church would still say that the person needs to be in a state of grace. So they would have to live a good life. They couldn't be a murderer or an adulterer or a thief or any of those sorts of things. It's up to, because those laws are written on the human heart, that when you are born and then raised in a place that forms a good conscience, every human being should know these things. It's just like the bees know to go where to go to find the flowers. You know, God made them in that way. They should be able to find the flowers. Likewise, a human person is made in God's own image. They should know right from wrong, even if they were not raised in a Christian culture. What do you guys think about that? I know that's going to be, in our modern age, a very controversial issue. But when we talk about...
Well, I find that real controversial, especially when I'm with somebody right now that he claims to be Catholic, and it happens to be the person that says the Sabbath is Saturday. And he doesn't believe in the tradition of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And that automatically removes him from the church. Because he says, they can't tell me what to do. And I argue with him continually about the same situation.
Right, so and I don't have my code with me, but there are 3 levels of belief that are required as a Catholic. You know, there are those things that are dogmatic. You know, that Christ died for your sins, the Virgin Mary was perpetually virgin,
right. God
is 3 in 1. So to be Catholic, you have to have those. Then there are then there are the things that are more Catholic, specifically Catholic, like the belief in the sacraments or the books of the Bible, the sorts of things that, we believe very firmly, but they have changed over the course of history. Even the form of the Mass or the number of the sacraments or, the words we use in certain places. Those are the sorts of things that you believe now because they are currently defined as what Catholic thought is. But then there are those things that you require obsequium. So obsequium means that you tip your hat to it. Like the rosary is a good thing. You ought to go to First Friday devotions. You need to give your kids a Catholic education. Those sorts of things. So that's obsequium. But there are some of those things you can disagree with the church on and still be Catholic.
Oh, I understand that, but to me, he's hitting the ones that the tradition that is embedded in the faith. It's a rock. It's a part of the foundation.
What are some of the things that he disagrees with? Do you know?
Going to church on Sunday.
The Mass on Sunday, for one thing.
Okay, so the Mass on Sunday thing is keep holy the Sabbath, which...
And he says it's Saturday.
Well, that's if you're a Jew,
Right.
that's true.
Yes.
But we don't celebrate but that celebrates the Passover. We don't celebrate the Passover. We celebrate the Resurrection Day.
Yes, but the Mass didn't come about until Vatican II on Saturday,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, he says the Ten Commandments says to remember the Sabbath.
So does he go to Mass on Saturday then?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
When you go, yeah.
What do some of the rest of you think about the idea of the church being one?
Being what?
One.
One.
That there's this unique revelation.
Well, it's important. Otherwise, look at the Protestant groups and how many splintering, how much is splintered.
Mhm.
I think,
Although,
I don't know, there's so much going on right now with the sexuality thing and the monies and
So I think that's where we're getting hit a lot, is that the church hasn't... I think people would believe that the church is one, and the church does have this unique revelation that it's
Yeah.
old, but because it hasn't been holy, they have a hard time believing the other three. They say, well, how can I trust these guys if they have so betrayed our trust? But I think this has been happening in a lot of institutions, not just the church. People are getting to this point of skepticism where they're cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Or damaging their souls, like,
Yeah.
which is even worse.
And so I think part of that, so what I've been seeing more and more lately is that with a decreasing number of clergy, it's going to be up to the lay people to make the church holy again. I really believe that in informing your children and grandchildren and the way you talk about the faith, it's really going to rely on you, because we were just looking again at the retirement projections, and there are currently 8 priests in their 30s, 8 in their 40s, and 8 in their 50s. And the rest of the priests are, there's 57 active priests, and 24 of those will hit retirement age in 5 years.
Praise retirement age.
Well, the priest retirement age is already 72.
Oh,
Yeah, and so in 5 to 10 years, you're going to have only 24 priests in the whole diocese active. So which of your parishes do you think is going to have a priest?
and you can't build new ones all over the place to pack them in. It just
What is
isn't possible.
Well,
I'm not trying to bring up an issue, but I mean, it seems impossible to me to visualize that everybody has a mega church to eliminate this problem.
well, yeah, but I don't know what the other answer is.
No, me neither. Well, I don't either, but
That's the problem, because then when you talk about consolidating churches or making them bigger,
they do that in Pittsburgh and it's a big mess.
yeah, but
Big mess.
but it's a mess because we can't seem to recruit young men to the priesthood. And it kind of goes back to that survey we saw, that we're doing very good at maintaining our retiree population, but nothing to get young men. You know, what is it that's lacking for the young men who want to give their lives to this?
I
Sacrifice.
something that maybe it's related. Have you noticed that, I know there's many orders of like women religious that, you know, ones that are more progressive, that like the average age is like 75. And then you have, I mean, I get mailings from, you know, the Dominicans out of Ann Arbor or Nashville or whatever, and these are, I mean, Sisters of Life or whatever, and these are young, I mean, they're having so many more.
Right, so I'm unclear on that. I think the question is about the religious orders and the status of those, and I would hesitate to say that this is about what's actually happening. First off, the number of sisters we used to have prior to the 60s was enormous. There were tons of nuns everywhere. Every parish had nuns. And after the council, all those populations really cratered, and they left. And I have talked to a few nuns who said that when they were able to get rid of the habit and live a more free life, they really enjoyed it. They really thought this was wonderful, because some of the convents they lived in were very brutal, very abusive, and not good places to be. And so some of the traditional orders are really taking off now. But it's unclear if that will continue, because what drove a lot of women to go to religious life in the past was that was their opportunity to get a degree, to get an education, to teach, to be a nurse, to work in science, and those sorts of things. If you were a woman in the up until the 50s, that was your best shot at getting an education, was going to the convent, because otherwise it was accepted that you would get married, have kids, stay home, live a traditional life. And so they think that might have been one of the reasons why women were going in such large numbers in those days. Although I don't know that would have held true also in the 18th century or the 17th century, because we had a lot of nuns then too, and the education prospects weren't very good. And the young women I talk to who are going into religious life, into the more traditional orders, say it's because they want to live a contemplative life. They want to give their lives over to God. It's more of that first century idea of being a bride of Christ and not living as the world does, putting on the habit and doing something unique. Will that continue, and will it be enough to turn the train around? I don't know. Certainly we saw in the traditional Mass communities all kinds of vocations for the priesthood coming out of those, but now we're seeing that the traditional Mass communities are being silenced or being suppressed. So I don't know where the vocations are going to come from in the future. I don't have that answer.
There's something to think about. I know, I go across the river, I know that they really encourage, like altar servers, like especially like, we don't have altar servers right now. And I know like across the river, I mean, they're really encouraging. I mean, they'll have like 10 at a Mass or whatever. It's just such a culture of...
Well, one of our volunteer coordinators at your parish called around to our families who used to have kids who served Mass. And of all the ones she called, only 2 called back. One said no, and the second one said maybe in September, Johnny will come back to serve again.
That's
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah. And it's not like we're not encouraging them or talking, because even at school, we'll get kids at school to sign up to be altar servers, and the families will not bring them to church on Sunday. They'll be on the schedule, ready to serve. Kid wants to serve. Mom and Dad will not take them.
Like I went to New Mass today across the river, and it was just like there were at least 8 servers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's just. But and that I know, and I'm not one. My own daughters were altar servers, so I'm not like, oh, well, you know, you have to be boy because then that's a stepping stone for vocations. Although I agree that it is, but I think that
The reason why that's important is that girls tend to mature faster than boys. So when you are teaching boys and girls how to serve Mass, the girls get it earlier. The boys are still kind of flubbing around and trying to figure it out. No offense, boys. But then they get embarrassed because the girls know it better than they do, and then they just stop coming because they don't want to be shown up by the girls. And so then, as time goes on, the roles of servers you'll usually have like one boy who's really good, and then 20 or 30 girls who serve because the boys won't. It's just, we just keep spinning this cycle over and over again, and then wonder why things never change. I'm not saying girls shouldn't serve, but I would recommend that maybe we have boy and girl teams. But I've done that in certain parishes, and then received a letter from my boss saying you can't do that. So
Yeah, I think we keep kind of getting back to the fundamental issue of the crisis of faith, like in families, like, for example, how is it that, especially at a Catholic parish, that you can't drum up enough boys or their families aren't going to Mass, or at Catholic school principals have to, write letters and say, boy, I really hope to see you at Mass this Sunday. I mean, why would you send your kid to a Catholic school and not go to Mass on Sunday?
And most people will say that they're too busy on Sunday. They have sports or they have
which is
music.
just like, that's old Houston, that is the problem.
Right. All right, let's keep. We don't have many questions to go through, but let's keep pushing. And this is a very difficult set of questions. So then, what is the church? Capital C. The church is the congregation of all those who profess the faith of Christ, partake of the same sacraments, and are governed by the lawful pastors under one visible head. So, when we use the term church, we typically are understanding it as the church universal, founded by Christ on the apostles with the Pope as its visible head. Then there are other, what we call sui juris churches, which means they have their own law. And these are churches like the Ruthenian Catholic Church, or the Coptic Catholic Church, Chaldean Catholic Church. These are Catholic churches in union with Rome, but they have their own rituals. They have their own Mass. And then there are the Orthodox churches, which have apostolic origins, but are not in union with Rome. Now, the problem with that is that if they were in union with Rome, we wouldn't even know what that looks like, because they would still be allowed their own laws, their own practices, their own everything. They just look at it, I think, typically, and would say that we are still loyal to the idea of Rome as it was 1,000 years ago. But the Pope has taken on such a greater role in the world now that he's a political leader, he owns land, he has all this social media influence. They would say that we're not submitting to that. And the things that Rome is doing now, we don't agree with. So if you look at some of these Eastern Orthodox bishops, they have their own YouTube shows and podcasts. Have you watched any of these guys? They're hilarious. And the ones that are in English are very interesting. But you'll see that their understanding of what the church is, to our ears, would sound very medieval, because they're still in that 12th century understanding, 13th century understanding of what the church is. And we wouldn't have talked much the same way up until Vatican II. So I'm not trying to be revolutionary here or anything, but I'm saying that the Orthodox churches have a different way of looking at it. But then we have what are called Christian communities, and this is what we would call all the different churches here in town that are not Catholic. So you've got the First or Second Baptist, you've got the Faith United, you've got the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian, Lutheran, on and on and on. We would call their building a church, but their aspect, what they are, we call that a Christian community. And we would not use the term capital C church, because the church is the Catholic Church. And then they are Christian communities that's kind of a subset of that. Does that make sense? So for us, to be church means that you are a congregation who profess the faith of Christ, partake of all the same sacraments, so we share the same Eucharist, confession, anointing, marriage, all that sort of stuff, and are governed by their lawful pastors under one visible head. So it's pastor, bishop, pope, right? And then in that line, we see the hierarchy that has remained there since the first centuries, and that is the church. So for instance, in each church, and we have little symbols of this unity. In all of our altars, we'll have a relic of a saint. Okay, so the relic of the saint will then remind us that we're part of that saint's faith, we're the same church. And when I put the little particle of the host in the chalice, in the ancient days, that was actually a bit of a host that came from the Pope's table, that the Pope would have consecrated and then mixed in with the communion at the individual masses to show the unity with the Holy Father. We don't do that now because the church is too big. But
Who is the relic at Holy Family? Do we know?
who's the relic at Holy
And
Family?
is it in the new table or is it?
It's in the new table. I looked at it and now I can't remember, but I'll reference that for you. No, here at St. Alphonsus, it's actually St. Al, so St. Alphonsus is in there. I was just listening to a relevant radio the other day, and the priest was talking about how around the world they're getting more and more reports of people who are spontaneously converting to Christianity from all the other religions. He keeps getting these reports of people who had a dream where this man in a white robe appeared to him and appeared to the dreamer and started teaching him about faith, and realized over time that it was Christ who was talking to him. And apparently this has been happening more frequently lately, and people are spontaneously converting to the faith again.
I mean, he's going back.
So even at the present day, in many countries where holy missionaries are trying to teach the true religion, their converts sometimes have to go great distances to hear Mass. And even then, it is not celebrated in comfortable churches, but probably on the slope of a rugged mountain or in some lonely valley or wood where they may not be seen, for they fear if they are captured, as often happens, both they and their priest will be put to death. You can read in the account of foreign missions that almost every year some priests and many people are martyred for their faith. It is not disgraceful then to see some Catholics giving up their holy faith and the practice of their religion so easily, sometimes for a little money, property, or gain, even for a bad habit, or for irreligious companions and friends. What answer will they make on the day of judgment when they stand side by side with those who died for the faith? But we're seeing this now. I think there were just there's a pastor up in Canada who was arrested and facing 4 years in prison for having services during COVID. I think in Australia, or maybe, I think it was Australia, there's a whole congregation was arrested
Australia's really getting bad.
for breaking a curfew.
Nigeria is always losing priests.
Yeah. So it's not, just because we're in the 21st century doesn't mean the persecutions are over. They're still there.
It's going to
Just
be bad in Afghanistan too.
different reasons, but the effects are the same. So we have a visible and an invisible head of the church. Who is the invisible head of the church? Well, it's Jesus. And the Holy Father, the Pope, is the visible head of the church. The example they give here is that if you owned, or I'll read it here, a merchant of one country wishes to establish a branch of his business in another. He remains in the new country long enough to establish the branch business, and then appointing someone to take his place, returns to his own country. He is still the head of the new establishment, but its invisible head for the people of that country, while its visible head is the agent or representative he is placed in charge to carry on the business in his name and interest. So St. Peter becomes the first visible head of the church, and Christ is the invisible head because he's returned to heaven. But the Bishop of Rome takes on this office that is passed on through the generations to the present day. And the job of the Pope is to maintain the apostolic faith as it was given to him, and then he hands it on to the next guy. You'll see this example of the deposit of faith. So the deposit of faith are all the things that we received from the apostles. And the job of the Pope and the bishops is to take that deposit and then just give it to the next guy. You don't change it, take stuff away, add things. You just take the same deposit and hand it on. So the things like the nature of Christ, the nature of God, the nature of the church, all those things are part of the deposit of faith. So question 119, who are the successors of the other apostles? Well, the successors of the other apostles are the bishops of the Holy Catholic Church. Question 120, why did Christ found the church? Well, we already ought to know this. Christ founded the church to teach, govern, sanctify, and save all men. So this is the role of any pastor, that the pastor's first duty is to teach, govern, and sanctify. And by doing that, then the church saves them through that ministry. This is called the triple munera, or the triple responsibility. So teaching, this is what I'm doing now. I'm teaching this class. As I've taught Bible study in the past, or when I preach on Sunday, I'm teaching. So when I govern, I just signed a bunch of checks today to pay the bills. That's governing. Making sure that we have enough money in there to cover payroll when it comes around, that's governing. And then sanctify, as I lead the church with the sacraments, the sacramental life of the church, I'm sanctifying its members. So if any of you have a pastor who's not doing one of those three things, just remind them that they've got a responsibility to do those things. And the bishop told them on the ordination, that's what you're supposed to do. And question 121, are all bound to belong to the church? All are bound to belong to the church, and he who knows the church to be the true church and remains out of it cannot be saved. So this is why the missionary activity of the church is so important, to tell people the way of salvation, to tell people that there is truly a way to get to heaven and a way to have a good life. And if you just go back to the story of Adam and Eve or the story of Cain and Abel, that speaks very eloquently about why we need this message. Because if we fall into the sin of Adam and Eve, which is this disobedience, then all we have to look forward to is hard work and pain in childbirth, right? Life no longer has any meaning. It's just get a job, have some kids, and die. And that is really where the sin of Adam leads. If you're disobedient to God, you have no hope. You have nothing else to go for. So the message of the church is that you avoid the sin of Adam and Eve and you're obedient to God so that your life is more than that. It's now you're having children is about forming them into new members of the church and giving them meaning and giving your life meaning through that. And then when you go off to work, you're not just about getting a paycheck, but you're building up the kingdom. You're doing good things. You are having work that is worthwhile. And now you're part of God's creative ongoing plan. Do you see that? And likewise, if you show them the story of Cain and Abel. You know, if we don't try to get our sacrifices right and give God his proper due, then we just end up either killing our brothers or being killed in return. Then it's just a cycle of jealousy and death that never goes anywhere. And really, I don't know why people want to live that life. But again, we keep creating that in our midst. We take God out of our schools and then wonder why our kids have no respect for personal property. You know, we give this preeminence to personal freedom, which really just means personal licentiousness, and then wonder why people have no problem shooting guns in the street, or stealing things, or rioting, or breaking into stores. It would be so if we want to live in a better society, we have to do things that are actually going to provide that. So, like your friend Chris, who says that he's a Catholic but doesn't like being told what to do. Well, I'm sorry. Get over it. You need to eat your vegetables. Okay? You need to eat your vegetables. You need to take on some responsibility. You need to stop being so selfish. You need to stop living for yourself
He's hit some bumps and he's been rattled again, so he's,
Okay, well, and I'm not condemning him with
No.
that, but this idea that no one can tell me what to do and I'm gonna do whatever I want, that is not gonna get you the life that you want.
yeah.
You know, think of anybody you know who lives a life based on grudges. Do you know anybody who holds on to grudges?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are they the happiest people you've ever met?
No.
No, they're completely miserable.
Mhm.
Or the people that are petty and jealous, do they ever really get what they want? No. No, and it's unbelievable that people will continue to put themselves in these cycles and keep getting worse and worse and worse and never realize that, well, gosh, if I just lived out my Christian way of life, maybe I should give that a try. Maybe it might work.
But we didn't teach people to do that. You know, all the catechisms that we've had for the last couple of generations has been, God loves you, you're saved.
Because, yeah, and that's what...
So how, okay, this is my last night of being here because I've got to start religious stuff. How do you suggest we teach these to the kids? No, I've got 8th graders. How would you suggest I run my class?
Try that first session and just go through the questions and see what they think of it. Because the best classes I had in CCD were the ones where we actually had a discussion about real issues.
Okay.
You know, so when I've talked to young people, I said, you know, what are the issues that are important to you? You know, and when you talk to them, it may start out as how much money I have, or, you know, am I going to be a famous singer or something like that? Or be what?
Football player.
Or football player. You know, ask them, you know, are those the things that are really important, and how long do those things really last? Because what this catechism tries to get to is some very basic questions about human nature, but chances are I would guess that those 8th graders wouldn't even have the vocabulary to express that. It's like if I asked any of you to describe to me what the inside of the Hagia Sophia looks like in Istanbul, could any of you describe it to me?
It's got a gold dome. I don't know that.
That's on the outside.
They got that big picture of Jesus, the Panto Creator or something, don't they? But now it's a mosque.
Right, right.
So it's-
So it'd be hard for you to describe what it looked like if you hadn't been there. So likewise with your kids, I think like this fundamental question at the beginning here, when you give up this idea that the church has a unique message, the other side of it is that, well, then all religions are the same, all ways of living your life are the same, and they're all equally good, and I just go out and do whatever you want. And it's clearly not.
Right.
The evidence is staring you right in the face that you can be living in a world now where we have so much chaos and disorder and destruction and death, and people still say, yep, by golly, this is the greatest country that's ever been made. Give me a break.
Okay.
We're seeing that.
We'll see how this goes, Father.